Lopez wants it away.
And it's hit deep to left center. Andrew Jones on the run. This one has a chance. Home run! Mike Piazza, and the Mets lead 3-2. Bartolo has done it! The impossible has happened! This is one of the great moments in the history of baseball.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mets fans of all ages, here is your host, Nick Durst. Hello, Mets fans. Welcome back to another edition of Bleav in the Mets right here on the Bleav Networks. I'm your host, Nick Durst, and today, lots to discuss with the Mets, of course. Carlos Mendoza was introduced as the Mets manager, had an introductory press conference, and of course, free agency going to get underway here. The winter meeting's coming up here in a few weeks. So I'll start off with the press conference, which happened. And to me, standard press conference, every press conference, it goes this way. They say the right things, and then it's just a wait and see game. So for me personally, my opinion hasn't swayed too much. My opinion is, let's see what happens. I got to see it to believe it. The Mets have been down this path too many times recently with the first-time manager that I'm saying I'm not going to buy all in. I was all in on Mickey Callaway. I thought he did an okay job. Rojas, I never thought was going to work out, and it didn't. And usually when you hire a bench coach to become the manager, that means they were coming from a team that had a lot of postseason success and maybe won a World Series or got to the World Series. And that is what we see with the Astros going with Joe Espada. So Carlos Mendoza is still a shocking hire, even though it's been a week now and it's official. Kind of came out of nowhere. So to join me now to help me process this, please welcome in my guest today, Mark Healey. Mark, welcome to the show. I know originally you were just shocked, as the rest of us were, that the Mets hired Carlos Mendoza. But after this press conference, you are one of the people that has definitely maybe done a full 180 here and have bought in. Is that correct?
Well, look, I mean, when the announcement was made that Mendoza was a candidate, I really didn't think much of it, because at that point, I always thought that Craig Counsell was going to be a 50-50 shot. I always really bought into Counsell because of the prior relationship that he had with David Stearns. And I like the fact that even though Stearns did not hire him, he inherited him, and they had a pretty successful relationship. So I was like, well, if it's going to be Craig Counsell, at least they have some kind of, relationship. But then when the announcement was made for Carlos Mendoza, my first reaction, I was perplexed. That was the word I used, because I really didn't understand. I always look at history, I look at precedents, and it didn't really make any sense to me. There was no prior relationship. There was no, record of having any connections with the Mets or anything like that. And I was hoping for, a manager that had that kind of connection. With Luis Rojas, who you mentioned just before, he had a record of dealing with a lot of these prospects that he had managed in the minors. So while I didn't love it, it was also a makeup hire after the Mets had let go of Carlos Beltran. So, you kind of was like, well, maybe it'll work because of his experience with these prospects that are now at the major league level. But clearly he was over his head. I do think Luis Rojas will become a good manager someday, because I did like him, but it was clear that this was not the gig for him. As far as Mendoza, I said that my initial reaction was I was perplexed, but then I also went back and I said I would do my due diligence. And I used to cover the Yankee minor league system. So I went and I talked to a lot of the people that I respect, people who would be honest, people who would say, oh, this or that. And all I got really were excellent recommendations, that this was a guy that is definitely going to be a good major league manager. I factored that in. And then after today's press conference, look, I mean, it's a gamble, especially since this is a guy who comes from the Yankees. So Met fans are already, kind of on the warpath. And this is I thought to myself, just to explain why I was perplexed. I said, why would David Stearns hire a first-time manager and kind of put a target on his back right away? It's almost as if he didn't make the safe hire. He didn't go out and get someone that had a resume, at the major league level. So, but I really, really was impressed with the way that he spoke at the press conference today. I liked, for the first time in a long time, I was very happy with the questions that were asked during that press conference about collaboration, about trust, and about, both the questions that were asked of David Stearns and Mendoza. So I came away from the press conference feeling a lot more confident that this was not some random, we'll pick a guy that we can tell him what to do type of thing. And so I feel a lot more confident that Carlos Mendoza won't be overmatched for the job.
Well, like I said in my open, I'm going to go by the wait and see approach. It annoys me so much that the hire that the Mets, the best they come up with is someone who was a bench coach for the Yankees, and the team didn't have overly that much success. Very different in 2006 when you're bringing 2005 Willie Randolph, because the guy was there on a coaching staff that won multiple World Series. So that's different to me. He played in New York. I really don't know if Mendoza is going to be able to handle the run of the mill, day in and day out of the New York media. The pregame, I understand he's been in New York, but he's never had to do pregame post-game press conference. Every little move is going to be scrutinized. He's going to have to answer to, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? And if he really wasn't him, he can't say, well, this is what I was told to do. So I want to see how that plays out. If the Mets lose opening day, it's going to be the end of the world. They win every opening day, he's going to have to answer that. If they lose the first series, if they lose, the first 7 out of 14 games or whatever, and they're 500, it's going to be a problem to start things off. And I thought the question that I like the most, former guest on this show, Pix11's Mark Malusis asked Carlos, do you think this is going to be a team that's going to win in this coming year? And I'm so sick of this answer that he's giving and Stearns is giving, and that is, we think we'll be competitive. Well, that to me tells me you're not thinking you're going to be winning a World Series this year. Someone else asked the question about first-time managers in their first year. The last 30 years, none of them have been to the World Series or won the World Series. And Stearns was kind of like, well, everybody had to be a first-time manager at some point. That is true, but this is supposed to be a team that is supposed to be a win now, win later. I don't know if there's going to be any winning now. I think maybe there's going to be winning later. They'll develop their relationship here, and we'll just have to see and wait it out. But it's going to come down to here, Mark, the offseason and what's going to be going on. We know Stearns was asked again about spending the money, and he's like, well, maybe some seasons we'll spend the big money, some seasons we won't. You have to pick and choose our right spots. I don't know what's going to be happening here. Then I watched MLB Network. They have a projected lineup for next year. They have Vogelback still in there batting 5th. Brett Beatty's in there batting 9th. The starting rotation has Jose Budo, Joey Lucchesi, and Tyler McGill in there. That is not a team that's going to win. That's not a team that's going to compete. So what is going to happen here in free agency here? What is the backup plan going to be if they don't get Ohtani, if they don't get Yamamoto? We know Yamamoto is going to have a lot of suitors. We know Ohtani, we assume the Mets are going to be on him, but it's really going to be up to what he wants to do there. So I guess I'll ask you this first, Mark. Ohtani and Yamamoto, are either of these players Mets? And if not, what's the backup plan to, one with Ohtani, get some offense into this lineup that is desperately needing it dating back to the end of 2022? And then we'll pause and we can talk about the rotation.
Well, I think when you're talking about position players and how they're going to make up the roster, if Daniel Vogelbach is batting 5th, I'm going to be miserable, and I think every Met fan would be as well, and just because, this is what MLB Network, I guess, predicted that the lineup was going to be. I mean, we have no idea. Nobody.
It all depends. It's going based off the current roster.
I mean, he's not even, I mean, he's definitely a candidate to be non-tendered. And I don't.
Let's keep in mind, Stearns did trade for him before.
Yeah, he did, but he also did DFA him. So, I think that I don't think he's going to die on that hill. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest question And really, what's going to determine how they fill the rest of those spots is Starling Marte. I mean, he was a huge reason why they struggled so much offensively last year. Not have the difference between the obviously the starting rotation, which we'll touch on. The starting rotation was pretty awful last year, and I think that is the biggest reason why they struggled so much. But not having Starling Marte at the same level he was the year before was a huge a deal for the Mets. You can't have Jeff McNeil playing left field every day, for a team that's supposed to contend, for a pennant. You just can't have it. I'm sorry. I love Jeff McNeil, but he's a second baseman because he puts up second baseman type numbers. He'll win a batting title. He'll, hit the occasional home run. He plays a good second base. But now they have Ronnie Mauricio, who seems to be a more dynamic player. And then when you put Jeff McNeil out in the outfield, it's not exactly, a guy who you can pencil in for anything. He struggled a lot last year too. And like I said, I like Jeff McNeil, but he's not the kind of guy that I'm looking at. The Mets need a solid 3-4-5. They need that. Every Met team that has been a contender has had that solid 3-4-5. As far as Ohtani's concerned, I think we all know that the Mets would be prepared to give him the biggest contract. I don't think he's coming here. And I've never really felt that he was coming here. I did at the beginning of last year because I had so much confidence that the Mets were going to be good. But there looked like there might have been a window where they might have been able to trade for him, or that they were going to have an even better year in 2023 that they did in 2022, and that would be enticing for Ohtani. But I don't think Ohtani wants to roll the dice on a team that may be good in 2024 or is building to 2025, and I don't think that's going to be the main reason. I think he's going to go to the Dodgers simply because I think that they've done everything that they've needed to do as far as their payroll, as far as what they wanted to accomplish in making sure that they had that salary, that salary window for him. That's why they let Trey Turner go. So I think he's going to wind up with the Dodgers. I mean, I guess in some Twilight Zone universe, he could re-sign with the Angels. But I don't think he's coming to the East Coast. I really don't. That report by John Morosi, and I respect John Morosi, but this idea that Ohtani's going to sign with the Braves, I don't buy it. That may come back to bite me. If it does happen, that would be a nightmare, I think, for Met fans and for the rest of the National League. But I don't think Ohtani is coming to the East Coast. I think he's going to sign with the Dodgers. As far as Juan Soto, I think the Mets will be in the mix. I think he wants to come to the Mets, but I do have a feeling that he's going to wind up with the Yankees. I really feel that is going to happen. And that's just because that's just the way I feel like that other shoe, going to drop, that's what's going to happen. I could be wrong. I know that the Mets certainly, need to bolster their lineup. I don't think they're going to go after Cody Bellinger either. So, I think what David Stearns is going to do is he's going to just try to move around as many pieces as he can. There are some young players now in the system, thanks to the trade deadline moves last year. There are some intriguing guys. I still think Brett Beatty has a future, but he certainly hasn't given anyone enough confidence that he can play every day at the major league level just yet. And so, I think that one thing we've learned from David Stearns in his time in Milwaukee is that he understands what's needed to contend. Like, he understands the offense has to have certain pieces. And, he was very creative. He had to be, because Milwaukee didn't have, obviously, the resources to go after the big ticket items. But he did put together a good team that was in the playoffs, 4 out of the 6 years that he was there. So, let's be honest, the Mets don't get to the playoffs and lose. They either are really successful or they're terrible. I mean, let's be honest. That's been the MO for the last decade or more. So I for me to sit here and target players and say, oh, the Mets are going to get this guy, the Mets are going to get that guy, the very first question that they have to answer is Starling Marte going to be part of the plan for 2024? And if he's healthy, then that's a big question that's answered. But I don't know if they're going to be able to answer that question until spring training.
Well, I think you need to do something here offensively. I think if they don't get Ohtani, the backup plan is we'll be fine with just running it back with the youngsters this year. We're not going to go for it this year. That's my opinion, because they're not going to be going for, like you said, they're not going to give an 8-year deal to Cody Bellinger. They're not going to give Matt Chapman a 5-year deal. They're going to say, all right, we don't have Ohtani, so we'll just wait till 2025. Juan Soto, we could go after him in free agency. I don't necessarily see them trading for Juan Soto. They don't necessarily have the tie-in prospects. But offensively next year, you can't go into the season counting on Brett Beatty, Mark Vientos, DJ Stewart, Ronnie Mauricio. I like some of these guys, but you can't go into the season counting on them. You need to have some sort of different combination at DH other than a Vientos, Vogelback, Stewart. You need to have some more flexibility. You need to get an everyday left fielder, unless you're going to say, all right, Beatty's going to play left, we'll put Mauricio at third. You need to bring another outfielder here. You can't be going back and having these random guys coming up throughout the year. And, we got Tim LaCastro. He's coming back off the 60-day injury list. That's not going to work. It's not going to be, as they like to call, competitive. But looking at the pitching here, Yamamoto, there's a lot of talks about the Mets going after him. I'm not very confident right now that the Mets are going to get Yamamoto, because this is a guy who's coming here. He's going to go wherever he wants. Money is going to be a factor, but I think he's probably going to want to win as well. He's won a lot in Japan. And the Mets are coming off an awful season, so there's probably a lot of question marks. It probably helps, of course, that Senga had such success here last year, so maybe they talk there. But if they don't get Yamamoto, I don't know what they're going to do, because they're not going after Blake Snell. We know they're not going to give him a long-term deal with his ups and downs. I think they will probably make a trade. I think they're going to trade for a starting pitcher because they acquired 4 shortstops at the deadline. They have all these position players in the minors. They have no pitching. So maybe they could go for Corbin Burns, but I think there'll be sour grapes there with the Brewers. They don't want to deal with Stearns. Tyler Glasnow might get moved from the Rays. Shane Bieber. So those guys are to keep in mind. But Mark, what's your confidence level here about Yamamoto? And if they can't get him, what do you think they do? I think even if they do get him, they should be looking to trade for other high-end starting pitching.
Well, I think that, one thing that David Stearns proved when he was in Milwaukee is that he could put together a pitching staff and a bullpen, using limited resources. And he proved that he could do it, and he did it. So I'm not going to worry so much about him being able to trade for guys because I think that, he'll make the deals that he needs to make. But as far as Yamamoto is concerned, I do think that is the Mets' number one target. I believe that is, whether he signs here or not is another story, but I do believe he's their number one target. And I think that, the success of Senga speaks volumes more than, let's say, a lot of the people talking, a lot of the folks that are talking about, the allure of the pinstripes, after signing Rodon and the disaster that was, I don't know if I don't know if the Yankees are going to, go out and sign another big ticket pitcher. I don't think they're going to, and again, that's another comment that might come back to bite me, but I think the success of Senga certainly is something that's more alluring to a big ticket pitcher like Yamamoto, because he wouldn't have to be the guy. He wouldn't have to be the only, the big ticket Japanese pitcher in the clubhouse. There's Sega who's there, that, and that doesn't happen very often, where a Japanese player has a Japanese teammate that's of that same, upper echelon. That doesn't happen a lot. So that has to, I think, factor in. And the Mets have had success with Japanese pitchers and Japanese players. So, and the Yankees have as well, of course. But I really feel that if Yamamoto has his pick of the teams, he's certainly going to get a nice offer from the Mets. The Mets aren't going to, be outspent by anybody if that's their target. So I definitely think that Yamamoto is somebody that is there, is a guy that they're going to focus on. I think Carlos Quintana pitched well last year in the limited time that they had him available. Let's be honest, if he was available the whole season, the Mets might have made the wild card. They might have been a lot better. But again, some people say, well, you can't count on him because he was hurt. But that was like a freak kind of thing that happened with Quintana. And I like the guy. And, I like the way he pitches. Jordan Montgomery, a lot of people think he's going to re-sign with Texas. That's very possible, of course, but that would be a guy that I would look at. That would be a target for me. Jordan Montgomery knows what it's like to pitch in New York. He's been successful in New York. He may love Texas. He may want to stay with Texas. They may make him the biggest offer. And certainly after winning the World Series, they might want to keep that rotation intact. So that's going to be a hard get. But I would definitely want a Jordan Montgomery before I would want to sign an Aaron Nola who's got a qualifying offer attached to him. And to me, Aaron Nola, that's one of those guys. You sign him to a big deal, and he doesn't pitch up to that deal. That could be a disaster here in New York.
I'm saving the money, and then after this season, signing Zach Wheeler, who will be a free agent.
Well, I would do that now in a heartbeat, but even though it wasn't this regime that just basically not only let him go, but they kicked him out, and let the door smack him in the ass. That was, I don't even want to talk about it anymore because it was just such a short-sighted, dumb decision that Jeff Wilpon and Brody Van Wagenen decided that they just didn't have the money. And so rather than just let him go and wish him the best, they had to give him that, half really just brutal way that they, kind of snickered when he left. Kind of the way the Yankees let Jordan Montgomery go. Let's be honest. Jordan Montgomery was like, well, we don't think he's going to be in our postseason rotation. Now he's got a World Series ring. So, I think it's very difficult to pitch in New York. I think you have to have a certain kind of makeup. I think you have to have a sense of, individuality, but from a team standpoint that you have to, you have to be able to have confidence in your teammates. But by the same token, you also have to be able to, clear the mechanism and get the job done. And we've seen how many guys have we seen come to New York and not be able to handle it, And look, right now, are we confident that this team's going to contend in 2024? I think right now with the way that the roster is structured, a lot of us aren't overly confident. Even the biggest pom-pom wavers have to say that there is weaknesses with this team. But by that same token, how confident were we that 2023 was going to be a great season because of the Verlander trade? Because having Max Scherzer and having all these guys and being excited about the season, I was super confident going into 2023 that the Mets were going to be better. And so what we think at this point doesn't really mean much except for selling tickets. And I know the Mets want to sell tickets, so I don't think that they're going to try to sell, like you said, 4 or 5 kids that didn't really prove it at the major league level last year being thrust into the starting lineup and into the rotation. So I don't anticipate that kind of offseason at all.
We'll see. I know for me personally, going into last year, I was very down on the team. I said, as I was leaving the wild card game 3 to my friends, I'm protesting. I'm not coming back unless they change the offense up. They did not. They sold us on Eduardo Escobar had a great September, which meant nothing. And it was pretty much the same offense. And as bad as their pitching was last year, and it was bad at times because the injuries, the offense was really putrid. Jeff McNeil led the team in batting average at 271, which is nothing to write home about. And they need to fix the offense. they really need to fix the bullpen as well. I thought going into last year, even with Edwin Diaz, it was not good enough. Hopefully they could bring back Dave Robinson and get some other quality on there. But the bullpen is always going to be a question mark on every team every year. Last thing we'll talk about here is Pete Alonso. And David Stearns said many times he doesn't anticipate Pete Alonso not being on the Mets to start the season. I think he'll be on the Mets, but I think Pete Alonso now with the new regime and the getting rid of Buck, who he liked very much, this is the first time starting to waver my confidence that he'll 100% be a Met for life. I think that a lot of the fact of if he's gonna be with the team long term is gonna ride on the success the team has this season. If they are awful again, like they were last year, I think he will look around and really consider the greener pastures, perhaps, because he has an intense desire to win. You can see it on him every time he talks to the media. He wants to win. I know he loves it here, but if things go south and maybe things aren't going great, they're horrible again, maybe he says, I don't maybe want to see myself here long term with maybe Mendoza and don't necessarily, get together on the same ideology. Maybe Mendoza's like, hey, I want you to DH some more. We know Pete doesn't want to do that at all. He wants to play first base every day. So I think that's going to really impact the success this team has this year is going to impact, I think, in the long term if he's here. Also, if they're really bad in the first half, I would not rule out David Stearns trading him. I don't think David Stearns is the type of guy who would say, all right, we're 18 games behind the Braves. The Phillies are in front of us at the deadline. If I can move Alonso to get something, I'm not going to not do it because maybe it'll hurt me in the future. But if the Mets don't extend Pete Alonso, or if they do trade him after they, got rid of Buck Showalter and they're going to come up empty on Ohtani or whatever, that's not a great look PR-wise for David Stearns in the beginning of his era. So we'll see. So I think, Mark, a lot of it, of the fact that is Alonso going to be here long term is going to come down to, in my opinion, the team's success in 2024.
Well, I think a lot of it's going to be about how he plays too. I mean, trying to negotiate an extension when you hit 211, I don't care what his power numbers are. You hit 211. So why would you want to negotiate a long-term deal coming off a year where you hit 211? And now he's got, Scott, I want to say Brocious, but it's not.
Boris.
He's got, his new agent now. What's his name? Why am I blanking? Right, there you go, Scott Boras. Scott Brocious, yeah. Boris is not going to want to negotiate off that deal either. He's not going to, off that last season either. I mean, yeah, he had a lot of homers, he had a lot of RBIs, but someone had to drive in those runs, and he's always had power. But you can't be a 211 hitter in this league. I'm sorry, you can't, and be the best player and get the biggest money. You can't do that. And I'm sure that Pete, and I love Pete, don't get me wrong, but Pete is I don't think he cares about Buck Showalter. I don't think he cares about some of the stuff that he says that he cares about. I think he wants to be here in New York. I think he wants to be the best player on the team. I think what I mean by is I think that he really cares, as you said, about winning. He really cares about doing well. He works very hard. One of the reasons he struggled is because he came back too early from the injury and he didn't want to let down his teammates. So you got to love that about the guy. But I'm not going to pay this big ticket price based on, what he's done. I want to see what he's going to do this year, and I think that if the Mets get themselves a real impact bat to protect Pete in the lineup, then we're going to see how productive Pete can be. So if you have, let's say you have a 3-4-5 of Lindor and Pete Alonso, and let's say, I don't know, I'm just going to pull a name out of the hat, Soler. Let's say they grab up Jorge Soler, who's to me, the guy I would really want to be the DH behind Pete. and Pete hits, 265, 275 and does what he did this year with his, 50 plus homers and 120 RBIs, then all of a sudden now Pete's got the kind of season where he can negotiate a 10-year deal. But, again, I don't think that the Mets can lock up Pete before they have a really good idea of what the rest of the team makeup is going to be. David Stearns is probably going to, if the Mets are terrible at the trade deadline and Pete is valuable and he's having a great season, he's probably going to get dealt. But that doesn't mean he's not going to be a Met for life, because he could go to another team. He could help somebody win a pennant in the World Series, and then the Mets could be sitting there with the biggest offer on the table.
I think it would hurt. I think it would hurt his ego if he was traded, and I think he would not.
I think if it's done the way that it's done, if it's done the way that baseball is run this way, where they go to Pete and they say, Pete, we really need to stock up this team, and we'll be there for you in the off season. I mean, if Pete's on board, Pete might be on board. Pete be like, what? Send me somewhere I could help somebody win a World Series, and then we'll talk in the off season. It's possible. I don't think Pete is, the type of player who would be pissed off if the Mets came to him and they did it in that kind of a professional way. I mean, if they did it in an underhanded way without really talking to him first, and, especially now with Boris as his agent, Boris is the type of guy who can, basically convince Pete, look, the Mets are going to be the team that offers you the most money this offseason. So go somewhere, help the Cardinals or whoever win a World Series, and, we'll definitely negotiate with them in the offseason. I'd rather that happen than the Mets have a bad season and then sign Pete to this huge contract, and, he's the only power hitter on the team. You know what I'm saying? Like, you need Pete plus, not just Pete.
Since he's been on the team, he's been the only power hitter on the team. They give no protection. Right. And I don't think that's going to change this offseason. So we'll say there's only so much. I know it's, Cohen has a lot of money. There's only so much money they go around. So if they sign Yamamoto, that's big money. They're still paying Scherzer and Verlander. If they got Ohtani, that's big money. If they get Soto next offseason, that's big money. So at a certain point, you can't be paying everybody $300, $400 million. I think at best right now, it's 50-50 that Pete Alonso is a Met after next season. And again, it's going to come down to this offseason, what the roster looks like, and then the performance on the field. And right now, we don't know. We don't have the answers. We'll see where the roster shakes out. Mark, this has been great. Thank you for joining us. Let everybody know where they could find you on social media and your writing.
Well, the best place to always get me is on Twitter, or X, as it's known now, at Mark C. Healey, MarkChealey. That's always the best place to get me on X. And I'm on Instagram at Heels9, but I don't do a lot of baseball stuff there. So the best place to really get me is here on LinkedIn. I put a lot of my columns up here, but Twitter is really the place where I like to have the most interaction with folks.
All right, everybody, make sure you follow us on every social media platform and our YouTube channel at Bleav in the Mets, BLAVINTHEMETS. I'm on Twitter at Nick_Durst, on Instagram at Nick's Food and Stuff. And until next time, everybody, let's just hope for the best. And let's
Thanks,
go.
Nick. Thanks for having me on, buddy.